with our cart provider set up here as well, we can start using it. And a good way to start using it is to add items here in product item. That means I want to get access to my cart container, so to say. And I can do this by using provider of, and now of course, with the angle brackets, I refer to cart and not product. And this gives us access to the nearest provided object of type cart, which is this one here in the main Dart file. Now to use the cart class here in products item, we need to import it as always. So we import from providers cart.dart. And with that import added, here we just have to add the context argument, and now we get access to the cart container. Now in the product item here, I'm not interested in changes to the cart. So here I'll set listen to false so that this widget does not rebuild if the cart changes. Because here I only want to dispatch actions, so to say. I only want to tell the cart that I added a new item. I'm not interested in changes to the cart. So down there on our button, we can now call cart add item, and we need to forward some information about the product, which we thankfully have here. Product.id, product.price, and product.title. All of that is available here, and so we can forward it. Now to see whether that works, it would be nice to output some information about the cart somewhere. And as I mentioned, I want to do that in the product's overview screen. There, next to my pop-up menu button, I want to have an icon button which shows the cart icon, takes us to the cart screen, and also shows a small label that tells us how many items are in the cart. So here, I want to add an icon button with the cart icon and an extra badge. Now, this badge on the icon button is not a widget that would be built into Flutter. Now, to save some time, I'm providing you with one. You find it attached. It's a badge.dart file, and you can simply drag and drop it into your widgets folder. The badge.dart file creates a stateless widget, and in this stateless widget here, let me add a comma here so that this is structured a bit nicer. There, in the end, we get 3 things we can configure: child, a value, and a color which you can set. And then down there I have a stack widget, which is built into Flutter, where I have a couple of children, and essentially there I render a container with a little box decoration, some rounded corners. Then if a color is set, I use that color. Otherwise, I use the default accent color of the theme. Some box constraints to make sure that this label, this badge doesn't grow too big if you have a large value in it. And then here I have my child, which is simply text, where I output the value, which is received as an argument, right? So this is passed in from outside. Align this in the center, set a certain font size. And yeah, so that's essentially my badge. And please note that in this stack here, it does not just have this positioned label, it also adds child in here, which also is a required argument. So it basically is wrapped around some other child which you define. And we can now use this badge widget here in Products Overview by simply importing it from the widgets folder, there from badge.dart. Here, in the place where you want to have that cart icon button, we can use our badge, and as a child, I define what this label should be placed on, and that's my icon button, which receives the icon widget of type icons shopping cart. Then we also need to define which value we want to output on the badge. And that, of course, should be the amount of items we have in the cart. And that's now some information which we need to derive from our cart provider, from this cart class. In the cart class, we of course have our list of items. Now we can also add another getter which returns us an integer which tells us how many items are in there. Again, to move the logic of counting that into our cart class here and not into our widgets. So here I get item count. And now here you have 2 different ways, 2 different approaches of counting. You can either count the amount of entries in this map, Then that means if you have one product with quantity 5 in there, you still only return a count of 1, or you count the sum of all quantities. So if you have one product in the cart, but that has a quantity of 5, you return 5. Now I want to return the amount of products, not the sum of quantities, but of course you can tweak this to your likings. Here, however, I will simply return underscore items length. And that's all. Whoops, and don't add parentheses here for getters. So this gives us the item count. Back in the products overview, this means that here in batch, to provide my value, I need to get access to my provided cart class. Now we do provide in the main Dart file. Now we need to set up a listener. We could set up the listener up here at the beginning of build, here in products overview. We could get access to the cart with provider of cart and so on, right? But that means the entire build method here would rerun whenever something changes in the cart. Now, most parts of this product overview screen don't care about that. It's only this little button that cares about it. So the better approach here is to use consumer. And for that, you need to import provider Dart from the provider package into this file. And with consumer, you now define the class you want to listen to. So here we're looking for the next provided object of type cart. And for that, to use this class here, we need to import from the providers folder the cart Dart file. And now we're setting up a listener to cart here. And in consumer, you now get your builder with your context if you should need it, which I don't, with your cart object or data then, and also with that extra child. Now it's here where I return this batch. So let's add this here. And value, since I'm now in that builder, can now be retrieved from the cart data, or maybe name it just cart because that is what it is. And then on that cart, we can simply get the item count. Now that's an integer. Value, however, wants a string, so we can simply call toString here. Now on the icon button, we also should add on pressed, and for now I'll not do anything in here. And up there, since I already used the underscore for the context, you could name this underscore 2 or anything like that. However, I want to use the child here. Because if you watch closely, what do? I change the value here. That depends on the cart. The icon button itself and the icon does not depend on it. So rebuilding this just because the cart changed is actually a bit of a waste. So I can cut this out of my batch here and on consumer. So next to that builder argument, I now add the child argument there and provide my icon button as a child. This is then passed in here as a child in the builder, and to avoid naming confusion, I'll just name this ch. And now this is what I forward to the child of my batch. Now these are a lot of child elements, right? But child here on the consumer is my icon button. This automatically gets passed into the builder by Flutter and the provider package as the ch argument. So this is in the end what I defined here. The important thing is that it won't be rebuilt when my cart changes because it's defined outside of cart. I then receive it in here in the builder and I can refer to it here. And batch also has a child argument to which I then pass this static child I defined out here, which simply is done this way so that it doesn't rebuild when cart changes. Now if we do a full restart here, I actually get an error. And if we have a look at that error by scrolling up to the beginning, we see that the problem is that the getter length was called on null. So that can only come from one place. That's in the cart Dart file where I return items length. Of course, the problem is items here initially is undefined and therefore it has no length property. Solution is simple. You can check whether items is equal to null. And if that's the case, you return 0 here, and otherwise you return items length. That is one simple solution here around this problem. Now this rebuilds. Now you see here, the debug badge is slightly above it, but you see that icon here, or the cart icon with that badge. And if I click on add to cart here, nothing changes. Why is that? Well, because we forgot something important. You always need to call notify listeners when you change something in your provided classes to which your listeners should react. So here, if I update my cart, of course at the end of this add item function here, I have to call notify listeners. Otherwise, my changes won't be reflected in the user interface. So now if I save this, if I tap this shopping cart icon here, still nothing. Well, we see that we have an error here. The error is that contains key was called on null. The problem here simply is that all my nice methods here on items don't work if items is uninitialized as it is here. Simple workaround is to simply initialize this as an empty map, which of course also means that this workaround here isn't really needed anymore. So make sure that items is an empty map here initially, and now if you reload with that and with notify listeners added, now if you click on my cart icons, you see the number in the badge now changes. If I click on the same icon multiple times, it doesn't change because in my implementation here, I'm counting the amount of products in the cart, not the sum of quantities. But if I click on different products, then it increases. So this shows how we can now manage the cart in our provided class here, how we do this efficiently, and how we can use that information in different widgets. Now, as a next step, let's actually make sure we can click that cart icon here and go to a separate screen where we can see all the content of our cart.